Time once again for What You Readin', where I answer the simple question, hey Chuck, what are you reading? What books are you taking a look at today? I got a couple for you. I hope you'll be interested in. Recently bought this collection of Popeye the Sailor Man newspaper weekly comic strips from 64-65. This is the Bud Sagendorf era. Bud Sagendorf drew Popeye comic strips and comic books for decades. Very, very long run on the strip. Originally started out as E.C. Segar's assistant, the original Popeye artist and creator of the character. Now, I'm of that certain age of boomer where Popeye was a big part of my childhood. Popeye, the Three Stooges, Bugs Bunny, formed the majority of my entertainment as a little kid, particularly the early Max Fleischer cartoons, which are still highly entertaining. Now, as any comic historian knows, Popeye the Sailor was created as a minor character in a long-running comic strip called Thimble Theater. And I think Thimble Theater, created by E.C. Segar, had been around for 5 or 6 years before Popeye even showed up. And in a story arc, though it was a humor strip, Segar wrote these long story continuities that sometimes took months to play out. And Popeye appeared in one of these as a feature character, and at the end of it, died. Popeye was killed, and readers were so upset about this, and the character was so popular that they demanded his return. And so Popeye was resurrected and returned to the strip, and eventually just simply took it over. Strip's name was changed from Thimble Theater featuring Popeye to simply Popeye the Sailor Man, and the rest is history. Bud Sagendorf, as I mentioned before, was E.C. Segar's assistant and took over the strip when Segar died after a long illness at the age of 43. Although at this point, Thimble Theater had been around for 20 years, and Segar's death left Sagendorf basically in charge of the writing and art of the strip, which he would do for, I think, another 40, 50 years. Sagendorf had a very, very long run on the newspaper strip, both dailies and Sundays, and did an excellent job. I mean, it was a shadow of what it was under Segar. But Segar has a very peculiar sense of humor that Sagendorf built upon, but mostly Sagendorf just used the stock cast of characters that Segar created. He really didn't bring a whole lot of new characters to the strip, but he did an excellent job of capturing the flavor and particularly the language of Popeye, and the totally absurd tone of the strip, and did a good job continuing it. It was interesting and funny, and though he obviously worked in the shadow of the strip's original creator, he did some fun stuff. But the strips are very rarely reprinted. This edition is from I believe it's a print-on-demand outfit, telling from the way the book was printed. And if you want to read these strips, it's great. There's not a whole lot of restoration done, obviously, on these strips. They pretty much appear as they would have appeared in the newspaper as far as print quality, but that's fine. You can still read them. They're still good. It's still and it's a complete collection of the 1964 to 1965 strips, which I've always been curious about. Always wanted to read a run of. So if you're a Popeye fan, this is good stuff. It allows you to revisit this great cast of characters: Popeye, Olive, Wimpy, Sea Hag, Alice the Goon, and the rest. And funnily enough, this period of strips covers a time when Popeye was still a major force in children's programming on television. So kind of cool to see it. The next book I read, it's a book called Killing Generals. It's about the making of The Dirty Dozen. I saw it and I ordered it immediately. It's one of my favorite movies, and I wanted some background on it. And I particularly wanted to know about the writer of the book and how big a part did he play, the writer of the novel, the original Dirty Dozen novel, and how big a part did he play in the creation of the film. And I'm still reading the book, but I'm about halfway through it. It's like salted peanuts, hard to put down because I'm just interested in the creation of this movie. I read the novel back when I was in high school, impressionable young lad, and the novel probably served to turn me into the twisted adult I am today. But I was fascinated by E.M. Nathanielson's story. He was basically a pulp writer. He wrote for the Men's Sweat magazines. He was very prolific. And if I'm not mistaken, this is his first novel. And strangely enough, he served in the United States Army, and but he enlisted, but was too late for the war. He was too young to actually be in the war. But he was with the occupation force. He was sent over to Germany for the occupation force and spent a couple of years in Europe in that capacity, where he met Russ Myers. Yes, that Russ Myers, the nudie filmmaker who would become a nudie filmmaker, an early purveyor of softcore porn in the United States. Russ Myers with his movies about the super vixens and things such as that. But he met Russ Myers, who was part of an Army film crew. And Myers told him this story about this group of soldiers called the Dirty Dozen, who were culled from the prison cells of military prisons and sent on a mission deep into Europe, a suicide mission, and were never heard from again. And Nathanson was fascinated by this idea, although could never find any proof that it ever actually happened. Maybe it was just a product of Russ Myers' imagination, or maybe it was one of these rumors, these myths told among soldiers. But Nathanson could never find any proof that it ever happened. And of course, the United States Army and the United States government denied they ever did anything like this. But it's still, it was always in his head. And he decided he was going to write he wanted to do a nonfiction book about it, but he, since he couldn't find any evidence that this suicide mission by convicts had ever happened, he thought, well, let me write a novel version. Let me just make it all up. And he presented this to a friend of his who was beginning a literary agency, and his friend managed to sell the book to Random House for a hardcover edition, to be followed by a paperback edition from Dell. And so Nathanson began writing, apparently with a very small advance, ran into all kinds of financial problems that were solved when his buddy sold the film rights to MGM for $80,000. And MGM began work on the movie. Now, the problem with this was Nathanson wasn't done writing the novel. He had written about 2/3 of it, but hadn't written the mission. In fact, hadn't even decided what the mission would be. And MGM assigned a producer, a director, and a screenwriter. Now, if I were Nathanson, I would not have. This would have driven me nuts. I wouldn't have been able to sleep nights knowing that they're already beginning pre-production on a movie based on a novel of mine that I haven't finished yet. And so they commissioned the screenplay, and the screenwriter actually wrote the whole story before Nathanson did, but Nathanson hated his third act. He hated what the screenwriter had done in place of the ending that he hadn't written yet. And I guess that goosed him into finishing the novel. In the screenwriter's version, the mission was to attack the V2 missile laboratories on the Pienemann Peninsula in the north of Germany. And Nathanson was horrified because the dozen would have had to have killed all of the Nazi rocket scientists and their families. So true innocents were killed. Now, Dirty Dozen conclusion, if you've ever seen the movie, there were a lot of women killed along with the Nazi generals that the dozen are assigned to murder. But our moral compass is sort of still set in place where it should be, because it's perceived that these women are also Nazis or prostitutes or Nazi prostitutes. So somehow their lives just don't matter in the course of things. Although the dozen killing women in the film was really shocking at the time. In fact, is still shocking today, which I think is part of the lasting appeal of this movie, is that it broke a lot of barriers. It really pushed the envelope as far as good taste and all the rest. And The Dirty Dozen really is pretty much the first modern action film as we perceive action films, and kind of created the mold for the kind of mission movie that we see today, the mission story. Now, the book reveals a lot of things about casting. I'm always fascinated by casting choices that didn't go well. John Wayne was sent the script early on, the original finished script by Nunneley Johnson, which would be heavily rewritten by Lucas Heller, a writer that director Robert Aldrich brought on board. Wayne read it and rejected it outright. He didn't like the portrayal of the military. He didn't like the fact that the character they would want him to play, the Major Reisman part, was womanizing in the original screenplay. He was a womanizing guy. And he just thought that it was kind of war movie that like hippies would like. He refused to be in it. Early on, MGM was interested in having Frank Sinatra play Major Reisman, but Sinatra was tied up with other projects and happily didn't take the part. And then oddly, MGM also thought that Tony Curtis would be a good choice to play Major Reisman, which just goes to show that maybe studio executives were just as stupid then as they are now. Another cool casting story was that Jack Palance originally accepted the role of Maggot, the role that would eventually be played by Telly Savalas. He liked the idea of being in this story until he read the screenplay. And in the screenplay, of course, Maggot is a unreconstructed bigot who seems to hate every minority and is very vocal about it. And Palance, famous for playing really scuzzy villains and really bad guys, he balked at playing a racist, oddly. And he says, I can't play a role like that, where I'm looking down my nose at other, another race or ethnicity or religious belief. He said, I won't play a character like that. And very vocal about it, very angry about it, and rejected the role, which it made me cast my mind back. He never did play a character like that. His characters were mean and awful and murderous and nasty, but apparently loved their fellow man. But it's interesting to read about the transition from novel to screenplay. There are vast differences between the novel and the screenplay, particularly the depth of characterization. Obviously, it's a long, thick doorstop of a novel, so a lot of things had to be telescoped and compressed. Characters had to be eliminated. Some characters were, 2 or 3 characters combined into one. And it breaks a lot of rules historically. I mean, Jim Brown would never have been a part of this unit because the Army was segregated. Even a unit like this probably would have been segregated. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in the book about the interplay between the different players, how, distant Charles Bronson could be. Jim Brown's pretty open about different cast members and what he thought of them. He enjoyed being in the movie, but he found some of the people in some of his fellow cast members to be odd. This is I think only his second encounter with actors, and he was put off by some of them, even though he recognized how incredibly talented they were and how much he could learn from them as an actor. And, the usual things with Lee Marvin about his heavy drinking and all the rest of it. But it's an interesting book. It's a breezy read. And if you love The Dirty Dozen, and why wouldn't you? You might want to take a look at it. It's called Killing Generals. And I picked it up off Amazon. Now, before I let you go, Spin Rack. Spin Rack is comics 2.0. It's a new beginning. It's a new threshold. It's the next step in comic evolution. It's creator-owned. It's creator-driven. Spin Rack is going to be games, merchandise, tchotchkes, digital collectibles, all based upon material created by Graham Nolan and myself, either by Graham and I together or Graham and I separately. It's all IP in a shared universe, and I describe it as a multimedia company. And we've got some extraordinarily talented people backing us up here, and we're getting ready to launch. We're getting ready to roll out, and it will be big, and you're not going to be able to escape it. Spin Rack, it's coming. Go to SpinRack.io and sign up so you can be first in line. And join the Spin Rack community. It's going to be a vital community. We're going to have tryout scripts. We're going to have portfolio reviews. We're going to invite you to do some writing, some drawing, gameplay, all the rest of it. It's SpinRack.io. And thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.